Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about biological basis of behavior. We're in chapter 2. I just want to reiterate that please read all the modules, the entire chapter, um, and the specific modules that I discuss here are important for your final chapter quizzes and also important for your midterm and final exam. For all other assignments, you're required to read all the modules in a given chapter. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so we're in module 2.1. We're going to talk about cells in the nervous system and what exactly they do. If you think of nervous system as a wall of bricks, then you can compare bricks to nerve cells and the concrete that connects the nerve cells to the glial cells. In other words, nervous system has two kinds of cells, nerve cells and glial cells. And we also need to talk about a structure, not actually a structure, but a functional space between neurons called synapse. So the outcomes for today would be to first talk about glial cells, the concrete, the nerve cells, the bricks themselves, and more specifically, then we'll talk about the structure of a neuron. Then we'll look at the gaps between the neurons called synapses. Then we'll talk about how information is transferred in the nervous system. So let's get started with glial cells. Now, there are more glial cells in our nervous system than there are the neurons. So you can imagine how important these glial cells are. Now, glial cells are not the building blocks of nervous system, but the building blocks of nervous system are nerve cells called neurons. But the glial cells are equally important because they have several functions to support the nervous system, to support the neurons, to assist the neurons. The first thing a glial cell does, or the one important function of glial cell, is to bind the neurons together, just like the concrete. And maybe that's why it's called the glial cell, that connects stuff like a glue. The other important function of the glial cells is it supplies nutrients to the building blocks called neurons. And it not only supplies nutrients to the neurons, but it also cleans the metabolic waste of these neurons. And some of the glial cells, they cover the axons of some neurons and form a sheath or a covering, and you call that covering a myelin sheath. We'll talk more about this myelin sheath in a few minutes. And what this myelin sheath does is it insulates the axon. If you compare, we'll probably wait till we get to the structure of the neuron to talk more about the myelin sheath. Okay, let's look at the structure of a neuron. When you look at a neuron is like any other cell, basically. But a cell that is specialized to carry information, to communicate information within the nervous system. And it is a building block of nervous system. The major function, the main purpose or the function of neuron is to communicate, to transfer information from one part of the nervous system to another. And the way they communicate, neurons communicate, or the way information gets transferred within the nervous system is in the form of electrochemical messaging system. So information is passed or transferred through either electric format or chemical format. And we'll talk more about this electrochemical messaging in a second. So to talk about the structure of a neuron in detail, a neuron is like any other cell structurally. So a cell has a main cell body, right? So a cell has the cytoplasm, the nucleus, the cell membrane, right? So that's what it is, basically a cell. We call this main basic part of the cell as soma. And there are some extensions, as if the cell membrane extends. Some of these extensions of the cell membrane are smaller, and there is at least one extension that is very long. And you call this long extension the axon. And these shorter branches or extensions as dendrites. But soma is the main important structure. It has all the cell organelles, the ones that you may have learned in your high school, things like nucleus, cytoplasm, mitochondria, or any other cell, all other cell organelles. And soma, as I said, has two kinds of branches that protrude. The shorter branches are called dendrites, and the long one is called the axon. And the length of the axon varies from as small as an inch to several feet because they become a part of the nerves. So some nerves carry information very long from one part of the body to a totally different part of the body, like your hands and your extremities. So the length of the axon varies from few inches to several feet. And these axons, they branch, they rebranch, and eventually they end in these dead ends. And we call these dead ends terminal buttons. So you see the terminal buttons right here. So we looked at the soma, we looked at the axon, right? We looked at the dendrites. These are the important structures of a neuron. And the question is, how do axons differ from neurons? So the way I teach this particular topic in a class is I ask students to actually do kind of a weird activity where I want them to extend their left hand. If you're with me, I'm going to give you a second to make yourself some room so you can extend your left hand and take your right hand close to you. Right? So imagine you are the soma, right? And imagine your fingers on your right hand, right? These as the smaller branches called dendrites. And there is this one long branch called the axon. And this axon has smaller branches at the end. These are the dendrites. And so I ask this question, if you want to eat an apple, using either your left or right hand, it's right here. How do you eat it? Let's say if the apple is in your, let's say this apple, it's in your axon. Can you eat it? Oh, it's too far, right? But if it is here, you can just eat it. The point I'm trying to make is that if you keep this in mind, you'll remember that dendrites take information in and axons carry information away from the soma or the cell body. So one difference between dendrites and axons is that dendrites take the information in, they bring the information to the cytosol or the cell body, and the axons take the information away from the cell body or cytosol. So dendrites bring information from other neurons and to the soma, and the axons, they take the information away from the neurons. In fact, they send information to other neurons. So as you can see, the dendrites of this cell 1, this neuron 1, they bring information to the cell body called soma. The axon, on the other hand, you see the direction, it takes information away from this first neuron and brings it to the next neuron. So axon 1, information goes to the neuron 2 through dendrites, and there is some space right here. This space between one neuron and the other neuron, this is called the synapse. Because neurons are not arranged like bricks in a wall, there is no direct connection between any two given connected neurons. There's always a functional space. And this functional space is called synapse. And also these neurons are not connected linearly or horizontally, but they're connected in multiple ways. So one neuron is connected to several other neurons. So there is, it's like a web of neurons connected by dendrites and axons. So information processed from one neuron to many neurons. And information also processed from many neurons to one neuron. So there's one-to-many and many-to-one connection between neurons in the nervous system. And as I said, the connection is not direct. There's always a space between, or gap, or space between any two adjacent connected neurons, and you call these synapses. So that brings us to the next point, the synapse. So when you look at the structure of synapse, this is neuron 1, this is neuron 2, and this is the connection between these two neurons. If you zoom in, you can see that this would be the terminal button of first neuron, and this would be the dendrital structure of the second neuron. So there is this connection between neuron 1 and neuron 2, and the space you see here between these two neurons, that's the synapse. It's a space between two connected neurons. And when you have a synapse, then you have two neurons at least. And one of the neurons is called the presynaptic neuron. And the second neuron is called the postsynaptic neuron. And why are they called pre- and postsynaptic neurons? Well, presynaptic neuron is before the synapse in terms of the direction of the flow of information, so or a message. So because this neuron 1, this is the axonal terminal button of neuron 1, this is bringing information to the synapse, so it's a presynaptic neuron. And this is the second neuron, which is taking the information from the synapse, so it's a postsynaptic neuron. And usually, when you have a synapse, you have a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, and the presynaptic neuron's axon participates in the synapse, and the postsynaptic neuron's dendrite, or the cyton, would participate in the synapse. So the presynaptic neuron's axon's terminal buttons are connected to the postsynaptic neuron's dendrites through this functional space called synapse. So in this picture, this would be the presynaptic neuron, and this would be the postsynaptic neuron. So that information passes from presynaptic neuron to the postsynaptic neuron via this space called synapse. Now, how is information transferred from one neuron to the other neuron through this synapse? Is through chemical substances called neurotransmitters. And we can refer to that as NT throughout this class. Now, so two neurons, they transfer information from one neuron to another. Between neurons, information is transferred in the form of chemicals. Now, but within a given neuron, right, within a given neuron, the information is transferred through electrical signals. And these electrical signals are called action potentials or neuronal impulses. Action potentials or neural impulses. And the information between two neurons is through synapse. It is transferred in the form of chemical signals called neurotransmitters. So that's why, remember earlier I said that the information that is carried in nervous system in two ways, electrical and chemical. That's why it's electrochemical messaging system. Electrical in a given neuron and chemical between any two neurons. Now, once the neural impulses, the electrical signals within a given neuron are generated, they travel along the axon, and usually they are generated within a given neuron. The electrical signals called neural impulses or axon or action potentials are generated at this particular part of the axon, which is like a connection between the soma and the axon. It's called the axonal hillock, right? From here, the message is transmitted all along the axon and it goes all the way to the terminal button. And what helps this message to be transmitted quickly is this myelin sheath you see. It's like an insulator, right? Now, myelin sheath acts as an insulator, but you can see that the axon of this given neuron here is not completely covered by the myelin sheath. And in fact, you see some openings here and there, right? These uncovered parts of these myelinated axons are often referred to as the nodes of Ranvier. These nodes of Ranvier are the uninsulated parts of the myelinated axons. Now you may ask, like, if the axons carry information and the myelin sheath is acting as a covering, an insulator, why are these spots called nodes of Ranvier there without any insulation? The answer is that if these axons, if they have the myelin sheath throughout the axon, then the information has to pass through each and every point within this, all along the length of the axon, point to point, point to point, point to point, point to point. But because information within a given neuron is not directly transmitted like the flow of electrons, it's a totally different system. It's through induction. We'll talk more about it later. What happens is with these open spots, the information will directly flow from one node of Ranvier to another node of Ranvier to another node of Ranvier, and so on and so forth. So what this myelin sheath does is it increases the speed of transmission of information in a given neuron. So it speeds up the transmission process. What happens when the myelin sheath gets degenerated? In other words, it's destroyed for some reasons. Well, that leads to one particular condition called MS, multiple sclerosis. This degeneration of this myelin sheath covering the axon would lead to a sluggish, a slow transmission of information, that is action potential or neural impulse, along the axon, which leads to lack of quick motor activities, difficulty in talking, walking, breathing, because everything our body does, it needs electrical impulses for it to be able to control, right? For any part of the body, it works because it gets these signals from different parts of the brain. So how do neurons talk to each other? Well, it's through a unique way of electrochemical messaging. I'm repeating here, electrical within a given neuron through electrical signals called neural impulses or action potential, and chemical between two neurons in the form of neurotransmitters. So it's electrical and chemical. Now, how are these action potentials generated and transmitted? I think we'll take a break here. In the next video, I'll talk about what action potential is and how it is generated and how it is transmitted all along the neuron.